lovely examples here of willpower. And tonight, Vanessa will continue the idea of willpower, teaching us and guiding us based on this lovely work, Paul and Stephen. So with no further ado, pass the word to Vanessa.
On our way here, while dialoguing with the spirit mentor Joseph, mind to mind, we're talking about the reasons why we may come to Spiritist Center. Why do we come here? Why do we need to go to a Spiritist Center? And it reminded me of a passage when Divaldo Franco, the medium, he mentioned that at his God at Home meetings, he's so composed that even if he's in his PJs, he goes quickly to his wardrobe, wears a suit, because he knows he's going to meet Joanna de Angelis and other spirit guides. So do we, when we come here, realize that we're not going to a club, that we're not going to any association, and that we actually are meeting the highest standard of spirits that are in the planet Earth? We're not talking about only the way we dress ourselves to come here. That included. But most often about the spiritual composure. It's not about coming here and meeting only the incarnate friends, but especially the discarnate friends. Because if we come here with that mentality, then we'll get what we need. It's not about the person who is going to speak to us or is going to be the instrument of the talk, with all the respect to the person, or to the people who will be instruments of the passes, or the people who kindly will receive and greet us at the door. It's past that. It's about the spirits who devotedly take care of this structure, not only ours at the SSB, but any Spiritist Center, because we know we have friends over the internet that should also be questioning themselves, why am I here now at this virtual Spiritist Center? What is the goal? Why? Because I could be doing many other things. What do I want with it? Because in the 21st century, we have no time to waste anymore. Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, through the voice of the renowned medium Divaldo Franco again, on April 18th, 2010, at the closing ceremony of the Brazilian Spiritist meeting in Brasilia, Brazil, before thousands of people, he disclosed to us that we're living, those days were the transition, the official transition from a world of trials and atonement into a planet of regeneration. And he says, we should rejoice, but at the same time, he says we should think about the grave responsibilities that we have. At the same time that we should rejoice with the perspective that we don't live any longer in a world of so much suffering. Although there is suffering, it's not as cruel as it used to be hundreds of years ago, undoubtedly. But still, there's so much to do. There are brothers and sisters of ours that really depend on our harmony. And Joanna de Angelis says, we may decrease the wars elsewhere if we decrease the wars where we are at home. If instead of looking at people whom we live with and criticize them, we praise them. If instead of demanding on colleagues and our bosses, we pray for them, we'll help the world get to the climax of its regeneration. So here it's a recommendation for all of us to revisit the passage in the Gospel according to Spiritism, to gain awareness of why we are here. Every time we come to the Spiritist Center, we shall come with the attitude that we're meeting the people that know us so much that even if we try to disguise ourselves, they know us. 1. Still they love us. 2. And 3. They are here to help us. So I shall facilitate their work. Because we can't come here and create obstacles for our own best friends. That's not the attitude. And we're saying this because we are at moments of need to deepen our awareness. We're not here anymore to say, I, myself, mine, but to forget about us and think about the collectivity. It's time to let go of the ego, of what I think, to serve others. That's the only way we're going to understand this journey. A true account that was walked step by step by a man that really can be a role model for us, inspired by Christ. Paul and Stephen is certainly the bestseller of Spiritist romances, novels in Brazil. It's the bestseller. That's what the Brazilian Spiritist Federation says. Currently, of course, is the book No Solar because of Chico Xavier's movie and story, etc. But of all the many years, Paul and Stephen has been the best-selling book. And you may ask why. I asked this question a few years ago. Why? Well, when we read it, we're going to see it's just beyond the history of Christianity. It's beyond everything else. It's about a true self-transformation story. And that's why we come to Spiritist centers. As far as we know, we come here to boost our self-transformation, our inner transformation. And it's not on anybody to tell us whether we're succeeding or not. Because we are not in anybody's hearts and minds to tell how much of a struggle it is for us to be the way we are. It could be worse. But Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, in his message, he says, there is, to bring us hope, there is no way back into the trial and expiations or atonements planet. Meaning, from now on, it's just going to get better. But it's up to us. Prentice Mulford clearly says, the spiritualist, the New Age, New Thought forerunner in the United States, he said, it is on us to build our own happiness. So Paul, before he was Paul, he was Saul. And one of his trademarks was his willpower. Leon Denis, the French man who was the disciple of Allan Kardec, in the city of Tours, in France, he clearly says, our will is actually the main faculty of the soul. The main. So then we ask, how is your willpower doing? How is our willpower doing? Joanna de Angelis brought to us, God wants. It's God's will we're talking about. And we open this guided by the spirits tonight. So we're talking about God's will. And the matter of the fact is, are we aligned? Are we aligned with God's will? Because when I feel everything is wrong with my life, well, God's not wrong, then probably My will is not aligned with God's will. Did that happen with Paul or Saul? Yes, it did. But he thought, like many of us, or majority of us on earth, that we actually are aligned with God's will. Because then you ask, what can I do to change my life? I don't know. I'm doing the best that I can. Wrong answer. If I were doing the best that I can, I would be in another situation. Not saying about wealth and health and the temporary things of life. We're talking about the inner stability, the inner consciousness. We're talking about the clear conscience that makes us sleep, even though we may be sick, physically speaking. We may be undergoing problems elsewhere, but we can rest our heads on the pillow every night, knowing that God is watching over us and everything is going to turn all right in the long run of life. And we're not talking about this life alone. Leo Vieira, once when we were doing God at Home, he shared with us something very interesting. He heard at a Spiritist radio station about somebody talking about millennial plans. And that's again when we ask ourselves, do we have millennial plans? Do we have millennial plans? Vanessa, I don't even know what I'm going to do tomorrow. I don't even know what I'm going to do in a week, in a month, in a year. How about a millennium from now? Well, that's why we come to the Spiritist Center, to start building millennial plans. It's our time now. What do we want to achieve in 1,000 years? Because that's going to be now. If we want to be someone who does not react to people when we are in traffic and somebody cuts us off in traffic, we better start now. So maybe in 1,000 years, we'll be as cool and relaxed as we can be. If we want in 1,000 years to be tolerant to people when they come face to face and tell us the worst things we've ever heard in this life, then we better start now. How? That's why Benjamin Franklin, as wise and visionary as he was, the mentor of the SSB and many other Spiritist works in this planet, he said when he was only 20 years old to himself, I better acquire new virtues. He was only 20. And he outlined a program that is so renowned, but it's the one thing that he did that people, let's say, one of his inventions, that program, that people tell the least if they do. They talk about the eyeglasses that he invented, and this and that, and diplomacy, even the things that he did that weren't very elevated. But the thing that was mostly the most elevated, which was his emotional program, people don't talk that much. And that's why we come to the Spiritist Center, especially in the United States, to revisit these wonderful programs that can actually boost our willpower. Benjamin Franklin, with that program, he also envisioned a program that would make us work on our will to improve our lives. Not only improve ourselves, but the quality of our lives. Who do we think gains when we are more humble? To be humble is not to come here and speak with a kind and sweet voice. To be humble is not to think that we're better than anybody else. This is a true humility. To be humble is to think that we are open to learn always. It's not to apparently be less well dressed or speak with a sweeter voice. but the true humility comes within. And humility leads everything else. And if I have the willingness to do so, as Paul and Saul did, then we will make miracles happen. So we invite you to read this book, which is already published since last year by the International Spiritist Council. When Emmanuel, there will be a day in which people will study the literary style of this spirit author, Emmanuel, and realize the masterpiece of his writing. It's a true masterpiece. The way he opens a book, and it's like a movie. You turn the pages, you can't put it down. And he starts telling us about the story probably of the many of us, like Saul. Saul was someone who, when he was quite young, he had a religious childhood. He came from a very good family, and since he was very young, he learned that, one should love God above everything else. Not only him, but his future fiancée Abigail, her brother Jeziel, and the parents, and many other Hebrews at the time, they cherished the concept that since our early years, there is no way out, especially when we talk about willpower. As Joanna DeAngeli said again earlier, for us and to us, God wants. So my will depends on God's will. There is no true willpower, without the true alignment with God. We are limited if we don't align ourselves. Then, that's what we learned from the very beginning. When Emmanuel starts telling us that those times were so hard, much harder than nowadays. If we think our lives are hard, those days were incredibly hard. Not only physically speaking, but socially and emotionally speaking, life was so challenging for women and for men, for certain social classes, for certain religious people. And living in the Roman Empire was quite a challenge as well, especially if you were Jewish. You were an outcast. You were nobody. And we're talking about people that lived in that class. Abigail and Jeziel, brother and sister, they had a father that was quite upset because the system was stealing his lands. And stealing the lands made him, in a certain circumstance, become so rebellious to the system that he decided to put fire in the neighboring lands. What he didn't realize is that those neighboring lands belonged to the very guy that stole his lands in the past. And that creates such turmoil, and you read the details in the book. Such turmoil that the whole family was taken into prison. Abigail, who had nothing to do with the daughter, Jeziel, the brother, and then the father, Joshadep. They were taken into prison. And in a very dramatic scene, we get to know this very sentence here. When Jeziel turns to Abigail and the father and reminds everybody of the teachings of the Old Testament, when they said one should love God above everything else and trust God as well. If they didn't react, they would survive in a better way. The father died. Jeziel was taken as a slave, Abigail, because she started singing in a praise mode to God. The guards couldn't take it anymore, sent her away, and said, you better leave because we can't stand this anymore. And she left. She was on her own. She found a family. In the future, she meets Saul, who is the doctor of the law, knows everything. has a great position, is well respected, is of the same religion, they get engaged. But then a certain point in the book, they remind us that for Saul, something was really bothering him. For him, as faithful as he was to God, he thought that to be faithful to God is to smash those who didn't believe things the way he did. And how often do we do this in our daily lives? If people don't think the way we do, if they don't behave the way we do, then we may not kill them with a gun or stoning, but we badmouth them just because they do things that are different from what we expect. Not necessarily people are bothering us directly. And that was the case of Saul. He had his synagogue and was taking care. And he was already promised to be the next leader of the Hebrews. But that wasn't enough for him. When he heard that there were people who followed the man who was crucified and were in this very humble church elsewhere, healing people. And that happens to Spiritists nowadays. How many people who charge for mediumship? How many people who charge for the healings? Hear about Spiritists who do not do those things. And they start doing the same as Saul did. They don't come here and close these doors, but they start bad-mouthing Spiritism. How often did I hear people saying, Vanessa, did you guys know that when you give the passes without allowing people to give you donations, you're actually indebting people? Really? Tell me the rationale of this, because really I don't get it. We're not giving anything of ourselves. We're simple instruments. So if there is any debt, it's with God. But God doesn't collect any debts. As far as we know, there's no collection agency there. So if there is no collection agency there, who is in debt? Nobody. And you think paying your money, your dollars, you're going to pay God? What is the rationale again? That's what Saul did in the past. He thought that for his own benefit, it would be beautiful. It was out of pride and selfishness that actually he started this persecution against the true spiritual people of the planet. When we talk about the first Christians, we are talking about the true spirituality that we should live in. That does not depend on anything external. It's an inner spirituality. This workshop is an open eye for us. It should open our eyes of the soul. It's as strong as Paul and Saul were. It couldn't be any weaker than this, because they were strong and straightforward. But unfortunately, the persecution began. And the persecution was so cruel, because the true Christians at the time, they were simple and humble. At that time, they were not called Christians yet. They're still called the men of the way, the people who followed the pathway of Jesus. And then he went to the church and saw this guy named Jeziel. He was already, and that's when the reader's drama began. Because we're reading and we get to know that Saul is engaged with Abigail and is living somewhere else. And we get to know that Saul doesn't know that her brother Jeziel is the very man, Jeziel, who is living very nearby him and being one of the leaders of Christ Church. He doesn't know. It's just a matter of the destiny, the fate of life. If that exists, we know in Spiritism it doesn't exist. We're going to talk about free will in a minute. But the persecution becomes so cruel. And it's funny because Saul comes with his friends to see what this church is all about. And how often we come to these spiritual places. We go to other people's religions and we dare to go there to criticize people's way of attuning with God. We're just like Saul, as proud as we are, thinking that our way of communicating with God is the best way. But people have their own way, whether in a Spiritist center, or in a spiritualist church, or in a religious science church, or in any other denomination or non-denominational church. It's not on us. If that feels the heart of those people. But Saul didn't care. He felt he was the instrument of God, and he had the power to go there and see what those people were doing. And when he saw Jezeel with his firm eyes, and with his sweetness, it was the first time that he saw such behavior. And how often we see people like that in our lives, and instead of giving in, we start being an opponent of that person's life. Sometimes someone in our homes. Sometimes it is a person in our family. Someone who is the leading force of spirituality in our lives or the family lives, and we start being the antagonists. Because, like I heard when I was only 17, and I used to teach Spiritism to children, and a friend at college turned to me and asked me, why do you do this? Do you help these poor children because you feel better about yourself? And then I turned to her, is it bothering you? Because if it is, you're invited to come and join and feel the same pleasure. It's rewarding. It's not self-love simply. Now neuroscience shows us very clearly. There is a structure in the brain that is activated especially when people feel like they are being charitable. So God set us up to enjoy doing good to others. Why? It's just God's answer. We don't know. But is that the reason why we do this? No. Because there's something else. But Saul, like many of us, couldn't understand. Saul looked at that man who was so firm and invitational and said, no, no, no. It's not you. It should be me. Well, he brought Jezeel to the ultimate circumstances of sacrifice. Because when selfishness and unhealthy pride or ego comes, they postpone our happiness. And that's what happened to Saul. For him, it was a matter of being right or wrong. If those men were right, he should change his life. And how often we don't want to change our lives, and we prefer just to cross somebody out of our lives just because that attitude or that behavior, if we follow through, will change our way of living. And then we go there and smash that person, either inside of us or socially speaking. Saul did the same. But he didn't realize that when he was doing this, he was just working out of his own cruel fanaticism. Sometimes we're not religiously fanatic, but we may be fanatic related. If it's not about soccer, well, it's the World Cup, so it's okay if people are a little bit fanatic about it. It doesn't harm anybody. But what about when we are fanatic about things that we can't change? And hurt other people's feelings? Like what? We may be asking. We're talking about people who are fanatic about their own personalities. Does that exist? Oh, yeah. They think that they are a certain way, and they say, I'm never going to change. And they want the world to change, and they become cruel to society because they start enslaving the people that are living their lives just so they adapt themselves to their own fanaticism towards their own personality. That's the way I am, people say. And if people like me, they have to swallow me that way I am. And that's when wars happen. Because then we don't respect each other's rights. It's only about my right to be like this. Saul was just like that. Saul was a man just like many of us that would go deep into his, as Emmanuel says, all-consuming selfishness. And who is this person who is deeply immersed in all-consuming selfishness? Is the person who wakes up thinking about his or her needs and spends the day thinking about his or her needs and goes to sleep thinking about his or her needs. That's all-consuming selfishness. But Vanessa, who else is going to think about what I need? But don't we have some time during the day, in 24 hours, to dedicate and devote ourselves? Think about, work on this area of our brains. It's like two antennas that we have in our brain. It's the posterior temporal cortex, a part of our posterior temporal cortex that is devoted to capturing what other people need. Compassion. Can't we spend at least an hour or two, at least a day, thinking about what do other people need? And we're not talking about only, mostly, our children, partners, colleagues, and friends. That as well. But people elsewhere. What do they need? What if I dedicate my life? And people say, you see, sunny day, and I have to go there and give a talk at the Spiritist Center. Oh, well. Who gains? The person who is at the beach or the person who is actually sharing something, mingling with other people? It's who does? And then we ask ourselves, if we try to get out of this circle of selfishness, we'll see a life from a different perspective. That time, Saul didn't know better. He actually envied. Jeziel had another name at the time, Stephen. And he envied Stephen's peace of mind, which he didn't have. So he looked at Jeziel or Stephen, because he took another name for the circumstance that you read in the book, and it's not the time for us to go through now. He looked at that man and said, how can he be so peaceful in his mind? Because Saul couldn't sleep well, because his goal, day in and day out of his life, was to rule in his community. Pride. To show people that he was the best. And to have everything he could. Pride and selfishness. No peace of mind. Stephen or Jeziel, he had peace of mind. He envied it. And he had so much hatred and revenge against that man that he persecuted him to death. But what he didn't know is that by the time he actually prepared the execution of Stephen, Abigail, his fiancée, who came along with him to witness that glorious moment, socially speaking, that she would realize that that man was the very brother she had been looking for. What does that mean? Their engagement went downhill. He couldn't stay with that woman anymore. He killed the very brother of the love of his life. And that's when his conflict escalated to levels. He got conflicted because he lost the love of his life. People were thinking he was great because he started the persecution against the Christians. And deep inside, he was just getting submerged into this great conflict and guilt. Well, his self-esteem was going to be challenged. He was starting thinking who he was. And neuroscience nowadays shows us that when our self-esteem is being challenged, we should watch out. Because something may happen also to our brains. Neuroscience in 2004, in a journal that is considered to be reliable, showed to us that when our self-esteem goes down, our brains may shrink. If you want to read the study to get into details, because I have to just put in lay terms here, but if you want to get the scientific terms, I have the paper and I can share this with you. But it shows to us that people who actually have low self-worth, they have a brain that is a fifth smaller than those who felt good about themselves. Now let's translate what he means, because that's what was happening to Saul at the time. Not about the brain, because we don't know. Well, we're talking about his self-worth. He was going down. It was high here, and then he was being challenged, thinking, oh my God, what is happening in my life? Why don't I get what I need? Why do I lose everything that I need, etc., etc., etc. What is low self-worth? It is translated into sentences such as, when I look at myself in the mirror and feel like I don't deserve any better, I don't deserve anybody in my life, I am not good enough for good things in life. Oh, Vanessa, are you talking about me? We're talking about anybody who is in that mode. Some people will be challenged in life, and during a crisis, they will feel like this. The problem is when we make this a pattern in our life, thinking that we never get the things that we need and deserve. Low self-worth. In Spiritism, we know this is an open door, right? It's an open door to the minds in the spiritual realm that really don't appreciate us and are looking forward to an open door to come in and create a big mess. All they need is low self-esteem. So tonight, we're talking about the remedy against it, which is willpower. Because Saul, he was being challenged just like us in his self-worth. He thought his image of himself was, I am who I am because of the position that I have. I am who I am because of the many languages that I speak. He could speak Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. He spoke basically all the main languages of the time. In those lands, he could read and write. At times when reading and writing were really an asset. He had money, he had power, he had influence, he had connections. He had everything. But then he started losing everything. Because then he observed he was not that powerful. He observed that all that he had wasn't enough to achieve the peace of mind that he was looking for. So he started doubting himself and doubting life, doubting even what the teachers, Emmanuel says, the teachers of his time, they taught him, if you fulfill God's will, you will be happy. And he said, but I'm not happy. A parenthesis here for us. When we come to the center, when we sit down here or over the internet, we think, I am fulfilling God's will. But what does it mean to fulfill God's will? Sit down and pray? To do the God at home? What is it? It's very likely beyond those things. That's what he didn't know. He thought that by going to the synagogue, praying, doing those external acts of religiousness, he was fulfilling God's will. By imposing his religious opinions onto others, he was fulfilling God's will. And literally, he fell from his own perspective. He really came out of it, because we're going to observe that he was being guided. Emmanuel tells us that when he was persecuting and creating the scenario for Stephen's death, Jesus from on high was contemplating the doctor from Tarsus, Saul of Tarsus, as if to grieve his condemnable detour. So here we get to know that Saul was not supposed, reincarnation-wise, he was not supposed to go and persecute the Christians. Emmanuel declares to us something that was never mentioned anywhere in the literature of the planet Earth. That's why we say the Spiritist literature has revelations that time will tell. In the Medical Spiritist meeting, which was the best they had during the last years, high-level people speaking and sharing studies with us like never before. And we had a doctor that was sharing with us, merging the Spiritist revelations in André Luiz books through Chico Xavier with the most current scientific teachings. Telling us that when we read these books, we're really at the vanguard of humanity's progress. We're not wasting our times. We're not only working out of our own belief, we're actually working at the highest level of humanity's progress, reasoning and morally speaking. And that happens in this book. For the first time, we get to know that Saul was not supposed to persecute Christians. That actually, the plan was different, like many of us in this life. Before we reincarnate, what happens to us? The engineers and architects of the spiritual realm, they sit down with our guardian angels. If we are progressing enough, we can be there as well. They plan it out. Plan A. And they do B, C, D to Z. Because past Z, really, there's God's boundaries, God's laws. We can't really bend those laws. So there is limit. Even for free will, there is a limit there. So there we have plan A for Saul. You will become friends with Stephen. You will get married with Abigail. And the three of you will work together to disseminate the teachings of Christ. But he couldn't take it. How often God presents to us people in our daily lives sometimes in the Spiritist centers, sometimes in the streets, sometimes elsewhere. And God wants us to be friends with that person, collaborate with that person to the benefit of both. And what do we do instead? Just like Saul. We become enemies of that person. What for? We're just wasting our times. Because if we knew better, we would find the best companion in this life. And we are talking not about marriage or anything else. We're talking about person to person, whomever the role is in this life. Maybe our daughter, sister, mother, father, brother, uncle, aunt, cousin, neighbor, boss, colleague, somebody whom we meet in the market, somebody who is driving next to us, and what happens to us? We start a war with that person. What for? Just to create more work for ourselves. Because that's what happened to Saul. He was granted the benefit of being friends and starting a collaboration with Stephen. And instead, he felt threatened by Stephen's peace of mind. He couldn't believe somebody could be as good as he was. And he starts smashing him. He created a problem for himself because he detoured. Here we are showing to ourselves that we have free will. But then we need to take the consequences. And from now on, he's going to see the consequences of his own actions. In our detour, how often do we detour in our lives? How often? Sometimes we have the best friend next to us, but we don't want to give the best of us. And then we lose it. And then we suffer. And then we will have to make it up. That's what happened to Saul. And here we learn about the signs of life when we are detouring. We start having conflicted feelings, feeling anguish, fear, because we're not in the right path of this life. But then we get to know, as Emmanuel said, that Christ is watching out for us everywhere, and we won't be abandoned. And that's what happened in this road of transformation that Saul started walking. So what does he do? He goes back to Abigail, but when he goes there, it's too late. He was so proud. She wanted to stay with him, despite the fact that he killed her brother. She understood with the sweetness of her heart that he didn't do this out of his craziness. He was doing this because he believed he was fulfilling God's will. But he was so proud, he said, no, I can't be with you. When he realized he could be with her, it was too late. And how often that happens in our lives? When we realize things and it's late. It's too late. He got there. She was so sick. Her illness was terminating her life. She was gone. But he got to know that she became a Christian. And that made him mad. Just added to his madness. And that's when he decided to go after the man that taught her to be a Christ follower. Ananias. And he heard, this man is in Damascus. Oh, really? We go there. So he was granted the opportunity, got some friends, and the story tells. In the path to Damascus. But then only Emmanuel tells us what was happening deep inside of his mind. Saul was not there beautifully riding a camel, which was not a horse, it was camel. And riding the camel, and then suddenly he fell from the camel when the light struck on him. No, no, no. Emmanuel shows us something that we don't have in the Bible, anywhere else. What was happening in the mind of Saul? Because do you want to be transformed? Do we want to be transformed? Yes, we do. How did he get to the transformation? When he was deeply immersed into his conflicts. There is no way to transform ourselves if we don't get to the valley of our conflicts. And that's what happened to Saul. He was there, and Emmanuel shows us what was happening in his mind, the questions. He was like, how come Stephen was so peaceful? How come Abigail got to know of this Christ whom I hate so much? And she died in such grace. How come these people who don't follow what I learned are happier than I am? What is it that I miss? Why did I miss the love of my life? Why did I kill her brother? What is this fate? Why is God doing this to me? And when he's deeply immersed in his suffering, Christ, Jesus Christ, because he does not invade the privacy of any of us. How many of us are suffering and are waiting Christ to show up and say, hey, change? The news are, we will not receive this visit if we don't open the doors. Christ by the door, but we need to open up. He opened up. If we want that transformation, we need to get to the root of our suffering. And that's what happened to him. And that's when Christ comes and says, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Why? And how many of us are persecuting Christ? Not the Christ the man, but the consciousness. We are still against the laws that rule the harmony of the universe. We are. And then, when we are at home and we're not reaching out to the very people that are inside of our home, we are persecuting Christ. The Christ consciousness. When somebody is in need inside of our very under the same roof and we are careless, or at our work and we are careless, I don't care if my boss is upset. I don't care if my employees is in need. Good. Then, why are you persecuting me? Christ is asking us. Really? Why? Why? And then Christ says, in a dialogue between Saul and Christ, let us feel it, the dialogue. The dialogue is deeper than the words, because it has meaning in between the lines. And he starts struggling, and Christ says, don't fight against it. The suffering is just a natural consequence of our awareness. It's natural that when we get to know these teachings, we feel the hardships of our nature. We can't fight against it. We just embrace it. And then he says, go, and somebody will take care of you. He gets blind. When we get blind, we're talking about our journey. So let's see. This is the journey of Saul's transformation that also tells us about our own and where will we play a role there. Here he comes with a strong ego and then started suffering, getting frustrated. But then this suffering and frustration gets our souls to become permeable. When people ask why animals suffer, Leon Denis, in a book that is not translated yet, it's named O Problema do Ser, do Destino e da Dor, the problem of the being, the destiny and pain, probably or suffering, Leon Denis says animals suffer because they need to be boosted in their consciousness. They are not conscious about life. When we suffer, we open the doors of our awareness. Because when we are too happy and everything is doing well, we don't really move forward. We get into the inertia of life. When suffering happens, just like, that's why we appreciate the devil's fork or whatever the name is, because it's pushing us. Go. The flames are coming of the suffering, and we have to move. So we say, thank you, because the suffering is telling us, this place is not a good place for you. You need to find a better place. Because when everything is right, then why bother? That's what happened to him. He was happy in his strong ego, started suffering, and then his soul became permeable. And that's when the inner conflicts came true. And through the road of Damascus, he actually made a shift. A shift that depended only and solely on his willpower. So when we are deeply immersed in our sufferings and conflicts, that's when our willpower will be the most important tool for us to bounce back up and move forward. Without which, we can't get out of the suffering. So, it is the hands of our soul. Willpower is actually the hand of the soul that will steer the wheel of our lives, give direction, and make us move to the right place. And that's what happened to him. He went to Damascus, met Ananias, and his blindness was overcome. But when our sufferings start shifting and changing, things don't become rosy all of a sudden. Actually, we will naturally undergo the inner desert of the desert of reflection. What is it? Saul, he had to retreat to the desert for 3 years. When we rediscover ourselves, naturally, we need time to recompose ourselves, to rearrange. But that's not enough. We need to reflect. And out of that reflection, we need like he needed, 3 extra years into the abandoned cave that he lived in the mountains of Tarsus, where he was rescuing himself, redefining his personality. When you are in the dry lanes of the desert, you need to introspect. When you are in the abandoned cave, you need to put yourself together so you come out with the personality that you need to live the life. When he was ready, he then had to redefine himself and his relationships, his family, how often we change, and people around us really don't understand, don't accept us, because they think we should do with our lives something else. Well, so be it. Still, we need to be strong enough, get our willpower to keep moving forward. Sooner or later, people will get it in the long run of life. That's what happened to Saul. His father didn't understand him. His sister, his best friends, the people at his church. Understandable. Even the people who were Christians didn't understand him because he was the persecutor. So he had to redefine himself. He couldn't be the doctor of the law anymore. He had to go back to his simplicity. And how often when we change, we need to redefine the simplest way of living, which is probably the best way of living. And in that regard, will then the next step be challenged at our endurance to finally come true into our new self. How often people say, I changed. Okay. So then you're here. You still have this long road to get to the new self. We all do. Every day. People think that just shifting here, like so, hey Christ, I love you now. I'm going to follow you. I'm going to preach about you. It's not that easy. Why? Still I need a long journey, 3 years into the desert of myself, to reflect deeply. Really? Do you really want this change? Are you sure you really want to give it up? Are you sure you don't want that again? And then once you do, then you rescue yourself from the things that you don't need anymore. You rescue yourself. But that's not enough. Still, we need to redefine our relationships. How can you change and keep the same relationships? People are not going to change just because we changed. Are you ready to redefine relationships? Are we ready to redefine the way of living? But that's not enough, because once we define and redefine the relationships, we'll be challenged at our endurance. And if we persist like he did, because people often think, piece of cake, he changed, became Christ's follower, and from there on, in Emmanuel's book, from there on, it's just half of the book. The other half, which is 10 more chapters, and we're talking about a quite thick book, although it's very enjoying, it's a quite thick book. And half of the book talk about how he did this journey after the shift, which wasn't a piece of cake, but was so rewarding. Because at the end, when he found his true self, when he endured the true redefinition of himself, we get to know that the two people whom he loved so much and learned to love, Stephen and the sister, his fiancée, who were in the spirit realm, were actually receiving him in the spirit realm. When he died, bringing him to Jesus, and finally going to the heaven of his conscience. Isn't that what we want? But His will was the ultimate power to make the shift come true. What made him endure everything was his willpower. Because he aligned himself with God. So much so that there was a day that he was challenged on his own mission. His only friend in one of his journeys, Barnabas, had a nephew who was quite young. And he couldn't stand anymore the journeys. He asked his Uncle Barnabas, Mark, the famous Mark later on, when he was young, he said, I'm so tired, I need to go back home with my mom. So Barnabas was very good friends with Paul at the time. He was already Paul. And you see in the book why he changed his name from Saul to Paul. But anyhow, Paul said, Paul, Mark can't stand it anymore. Come on. Instead of going to the next city, let's go and stop by at my sister's home and drop by and leave Mark there. And Paul said, what? No. We're not going to detour because of Mark's will. And then Barnabas said, challenge the friendship. You see? How often, even in the very path, we'll be challenged at our closest and best friendships. The only one he had at the time. And he said, come on. Aren't you my friend, Paul? And Paul said to Barnabas, well, Barnabas, almost always, friendship with God is incompatible with friendship with the world. And how often we are challenged by our best friends just because we don't do what they want, and then we shift, we change our lives, and they say, you're not my friend anymore. Sometimes at home, with our relatives, sometimes with our friends elsewhere. And again, we ask, is it possible to redefine ourselves and keep the same friendships? That's just a question for us to think. And so Paul learned that actually when we align our will with God's will, we become so strong that no matter if I'm going to be alone, I prefer to be with God than with the world. That's where he found power of will, because he aligned his will with God's will. Our willpower becomes strong and irresistible when we align our consciousness with God's consciousness, which is to think of what people will feel when we do something. Not saying that doing the right stuff will always please everybody. No. But saying that the right things will please God first and foremost. And in that regard, we will learn that we'll become healthier. Because our will being aligned with God's will become healthier in the greater picture of life, when we will enjoy a different type of health, which is the health of the spirit, which means that we have changed the cause of our life's worries. There's no complaint anymore in regard to these little things of our everyday lives really don't bother us anymore, because then I'm above and beyond the little things. And as such, I will feel more fulfilled. So fulfilled that, like Paul taught us in a dialogue with Abigail, there was a day he was so tired. He was being persecuted. And in a dialogue with Abigail in a dream, when he couldn't resist the tiredness anymore, he was asking, but what do I do when people do this? And she said, you give of yourself. What do I do when people do that towards me? You love. What do I do when I feel tired and I can't keep on going? You still keep working. What do I do when I keep working? Still people don't come along with me. You keep hoping. But what do I do when people still don't get it? You forgive them. And you begin again. And it's the circle of the remedy for our souls that will boost our will. That was a great booster of will in Paul's life. When he was in one of his worst days, in the dialogue with Abigail in the spirit realm, she said, if you work on the giving of yourself, loving anyways, working anyways, hoping anyways, and forgiving always, you'll never go wrong. Just like Mother Teresa when she says, even if people don't get it, don't worry. Because it has never been between you and people, but between you and God. And she wraps it up beautifully. In other words, saying the same thing. What will boost our will so we never stop? No matter if a day you say, I want to give it all up. I want to fly away. Take a plane and fly away and forget about everything. But we won't. Why? Because like Paul, we'll come to our senses, listening to the wise voice of our guardian angels, whom in the name of God are helping us, and they are saying to us, hey, keep giving the best of you. Even if people don't like it, keep loving yourself and others, because sooner or later they'll get it. And even if they don't, you keep working. Even if they don't, you hope. Even if they don't, you forgive. And start all over again. That's the best willpower booster that we can learn. After all, between us and the guardian angels, there is a great teamwork sense that makes us feel that we shouldn't stop ever. Like Saul or Paul, when he was learning these lessons of Christianity, Jesus was inspiring Stephen in the spirit realm to give him the guidance that he needed and his support team to give to the amanuenses the epistles that to date share so many teachings with us. With Paul, we learned the great sense of teamwork in our daily lives. He was never alone. Jesus was there through Stephen and Abigail, inspiring him, and he was working with a teamwork around in the incarnate plane, and through that serving other people. So that's the only way he kept on going and successfully working his willpower. Because after all, as it says on page 530 in the book, as he was distributing consolation and healing, he disseminated the plan in a teamwork fashion. So basically, we'll always keep on marching at our journey if we are disseminating consolation and healing. When we don't find strength, it's because we're not doing that. So we better find that way, and we'll have strength enough to keep on marching. Because, as Paul said once in the book, God is in urgent need of a job well done. God is in urgent need of a job well done. And a job well done is just when we love. When we love. There's no extreme planning of a job well done. There's just the opening of the heart. And that's what he did. When he learned it, he gained the prize of all prizes, which is his clear conscience. His lucky charm to fulfill his promises, when a guy came along with him and said, hey, Paul, how do you do these healings? Is it your will? He said, you know, my lucky charm, the guy wanted to buy his lucky charm. The guy came along, and it was such a funny passage. He came and challenged him and said, hey, how do you do these things? Tell me how much you want. What do you use? He said, you know what I use? I'll tell you. My lucky charm is faith in God combined with selflessness. How often we look at people that suffer so much like Chico Xavier. This year we celebrate his centennial. This talk is in celebration to his bestseller book. People often ask, how do you endure this journey of suffering, Chico Xavier? And we could almost hear the same. Faith in God with selflessness. It was not about him. It was always about God. Always about God and the Creator. That's what gave him willpower to keep on walking despite his heart problem, despite his poverty, despite his lack of intellectual education, despite his lack of social connections, and he kept on walking. I don't know if we would be seated in the center today, especially in the United States, if it were not for the endurance and the willpower of this humble man, Chico Xavier, who came to the United States in 1965, along with another friend, to plant officially the first seeds of Spiritism by founding the first Spiritist center in North Carolina and opening the doors of Spiritism in this country. Tonight, we shall send our thoughts of gratitude to the willpower that man, without whom we probably wouldn't be here. Because he really was the instrument of all instruments, because his lucky charm to keep his willpower on the right track was faith in God and selflessness. And as such, he learned, like Paul did, that the best witness is in dying slowly, day by day, for the victory of Jesus or Christ's cause. And as such, when we wrap up these amazing teachings of this book, we realize, or we start asking this question: what do we really need to boost our willpower? Again, at the very beginning, why are we here? Over the internet or seated here? In both realms. The discarnate spirits, the incarnate ones. Why? Why have we come? What if today were the last day of this reincarnation? It could be. Where are our hearts and minds? How can we actually boost our willpower? How can we get out of the circle of suffering? So now we're going to invite everybody to deepen this reflection and empowering our willpower, if I may say this, just to make it as strong as it is, by visualizing a different way to reprogram our minds, acknowledging everything we have lived in this life, opportunities granted by God, whether they were detours or the actual fulfillment of our tasks. Either or, they were opportunities given to us. Let us visualize a therapeutic room. A room that has the colors of healing. Whether the colors of healing for you are blue or purple, pink, green, white, whatever the color you feel represent healing. Breathe in the air of healing in this room where you are located. Sit down in a comfortable position, whether you find a couch or on the floor, on a pillow. Breathe in the healing air. It's your therapeutic time. And the door opens gently and slowly. An enlightening being with a beautiful smile approaches you. It is your guardian angel who loves you unconditionally, has come to sit next to you for this therapeutic session. Welcome and greet your guardian angel. Feel his or her presence next to you. There is so much kindness and devotion, dedication, that it makes you feel loved to levels never felt before. It's the love of God for you in the presence of the one that was elected to be by your side in this reincarnation. Now, he presents to you a box, a white box, and tells you that inside of it you will have a beautiful, shiny stone. Open it up and see it. Look at it. What color is it? It shines. And when you touch it, you feel stronger. That's the stone of your willpower. It illuminates your path to show you precisely where you need to go, and gives you energy to move through that path. Hold the stone while being guided by your guardian angel. And in a minute of silence, listen and see the plans that lie ahead of you in this reincarnation. And your willpower will become the ultimate tool to make you fulfill the plans for this current reincarnation. Watch it and feel it while listening to your guardian angel. Keep these images and the instructions dear to your heart. During your sleep time tonight, at home, you will be visited by your guardian angel to be taken back to this therapeutic room where you keep working on how to boost your willpower to unimaginable levels. You, like Paul, have the willpower to overcome your conflicts and, as such, fulfill God's will with faith and selflessness. Now, hold the stone of your will dear to you. It's yours. It's your treasure. Only yours. Nobody else's. Nobody can steal it. And your guardian angel will be next to you to present it to you all the time and every time you think you lack willpower. He will come with this white box asking you, open it up, and you see the light shining, the light of your willpower. Let it shine. Illuminate your path. Give you strength, the true fuel of the soul. Now, let's give our hands to our guardian angels there in that room. Hold the hands of your guardian angel. Feel the love that comes from him or her, the mercy. And let's say, in a therapeutic passage that we shall receive at this very moment, visualizing a waterfalls of beautiful light, healing and blessing us. Oh, Father, Mother of our souls, how good it is to feel your presence. We are so grateful for living and being immortal. We know you have plans for us. Please guide us. Inspire us. May we never forget that everything we do in this life should be actually aligned with your will. Strengthen our will, dear Father. Because we know that if we don't fulfill your will, not only we will suffer, but all and everyone who depends on us. As we are interdependent, we ask you to heal the inertia of our souls, transforming it into the power of our lives. May inertia be recycled in your universe and come back as new strength, so our willpower becomes the only fuel for our actions, thoughts, feelings, and words. We ask for your blessings for all and everyone here present in both realms. May you bless this house of love, this temple of light, the neighboring organizations in this city, in other cities, in the United States of America, in the whole world. May the works of goodness everywhere and elsewhere receive the blessings of yours always. And we praise your providence for allowing us to repair the mistakes of the past, to learn new things and progress, and as such, fulfill the unique role that each one of us have in your creation.